Thank you, everyone. Good morning. So to start today, just quickly some definitions of what I'm going to talk about. And then I'm not going to talk about a specific gene or something I investigated in terms of a specific gene, also on lifestyle factors. It's more some investigation of companies and the tests provided or available and how we should interpret the research behind this and to answer this question. So I'm going to talk about nutritional genomics. So that's the broad term for those two terms, nutrigenetics and nutrigenomics. So let me just see if I can get a cursor. Yeah. Okay, so first, the nutrigenetics is the effect of genetic variations on dietary response. So it's a SNP in a gene, or SNPs, many SNPs in genes, and then how they interact with something that you eat, so the nutrients or the food, and then what will be the effect. So maybe the person is more likely to develop obesity because of that interaction. So that's basically nutrigenetics. It can be any disease there. And then nutrigenomics is the effect of nutrients on or dietary components on gene expression. So it's slightly different to the other one. So when we consider the research, just to give you a little bit of background, we need to understand the complexity of this. Because if you talk about diet and nutrients, there's like on the left, there's a long list of all the different nutrients. So, you don't consume just one nutrient. We consume many different nutrients. So we must look, if we talk about diet, we must look at all of them probably. And then you can see there's macronutrients, micronutrients. Some of the macronutrients can also be divided in many different components or molecules. So yes, for instance, different fatty acids in the diet or lipids. And then for each one of these, you get different genes and they all interact with each other. So you get eventually, that's just one diagram, but eventually you get many of those type of interactions between the genes and the diet. So this is just to show you on the left, I don't know if you can see it, but all the orange is just where B vitamins are involved in energy metabolism. So if we want to look at weight and obesity and so on, we also need to consider some of those B vitamins. They're often cofactors with enzymes, and obviously a DNA, RNA and so on will code for that protein, that enzyme. And so polymorphisms on that can then influence the expression of the enzyme. And your dietary intake of those B vitamins can influence all of that. On this side, so the nutrigenomics, just illustration, so vitamin A, D, and your polyunsaturated fats all have an effect on, especially at the promoter region of genes, where, so with transcription, also zinc, and then vitamin C is also important, vitamin K in translation. So those nutrients are then directly have an effect on genetic transcription and translation. So, but what we're going to talk then about today, just with that background, is mostly our polygenic diseases. So things like obesity and heart disease, diabetes, weight, and those type of things, or risk factors for these diseases like blood pressure and so on. And can we recommend genetic testing then for those diseases, specifically focusing on diet sort of testing? So we must just remember that these genes in that definition, they develop due to a combined effect of multiple SNPs or variants in the genes, plus then interaction with the environment. So the environment is not only the diet, but it's also physical activity, smoking, things like that. So many environmental factors. So now I looked at some of the, what we call the direct to consumer genetic testing companies. and what they provide. So this is just a list of some of the companies in South Africa. So you can order these tests either online. In South Africa, they often work through health professionals or trainers or health coaches or so with these tests. So just to give you an idea, these are also, again, just some of their tests, not all the tests that they have. They often have many more. And they also do other tests. These companies will, for instance, do paternity tests or monogenetic diseases tests and so on, but then they also have these tests. So you can see there's a DNA diet test, for instance. That test focuses on 20 SNPs. So they will test 20 SNPs in the gene, and that's the price of the test. Then there's a DNA core, which is sort of a combination of different things with around 84 SNPs that they are testing. You can see this one, 3x4 Genetics, testing 349 SNPs. And then some of the others with different number of SNPs, different prices. So the price range is like 2,000 to 5,000 Rand. Okay, so you will probably not, I don't know if you will be able to read this, but this is just a summary, and obviously one can make long tables of this, of the type of genes and the SNPs that they consider then in these tests. So we are going to look a little bit at this. That first one is energy, so weight maintenance, weight management genes. Yeah. Okay, so there's a couple of genes there. And here I've just indicated those companies listed on the previous slides, how many included that SNP. So you can see all of them, for instance, included the FTO gene. And then some of them will include some of these genes and so forth. So they have this like fat absorption, carbohydrate responsiveness, that's vitamin B6, and then it's one gene, for instance, or vitamin D, calcium, iron, and so on. So it's minerals and so on. So I looked at some of them, for instance, this one. So this one was the first one on the list. It looked at 20 SNPs, but it's actually not only diet. So they look at fat intake, carbohydrates, eating behaviors, status, exercise response, and then also some sleep things. And there you can see the SNPs that they include. So say, for instance, on energy, it's only 3 SNPs that's included. And then on sleep, there's one. On exercise, there's one gene, and so forth. Okay, so just an idea, this was a study that a couple of years ago that investigated these, made a summary of these studies internationally. How many companies, for instance, included genetic testing for lactose intolerance? And then they traced or found 18 companies. And you can see caffeine sensitivity, there's 15, alcohol, 8 companies, salt, 5, and so forth. So different number of companies focusing on different tests. Another one. And then what you will often find with these, so when you go for your genetic testing, they have very nice reports. So for instance, that DNA core test have a report of 65 pages or 63 pages. Some of the reports are like 150 pages or 250 pages, very long reports, nicely summarized of what is your gene results and what you should do based on that. Now, it's often also, so you can see there's some examples of these reports and then what you should do. Tell about these supplements. So then they sell supplements, and then you need to address those genetic SNPs with supplements. So now it was now difficult to look at these all these genes. There's so many, and we can't really just focus on one gene to answer this question. So I'm just going to do one example of the FTO gene, because this gene has been highly associated with many obesity-related traits. So this is the fat mass and obesity associated gene. And just to give you a timeline of the research as well on all of this. So the mouse FTO gene was cloned in 1999. And then thereafter the human one and so on. So it was actually that a cluster of SNPs in the FTO gene was the first obesity susceptibility locus that was identified through a genome-wide association scan. And the FTO gene was in that time then assigned to chromosome 16, and that was in 2007. So the research is not, it's very recent, all of this, and so do many of the other genes. It's not many years. And so the SNPs are associated with the higher BMI, obesity in multiple association studies, so big studies where they did associations between this. So it's a cluster, these are the SNPs. Then only later, so at that time, I actually included this gene, the FTO, in when I did my PhD. So it was on genetics and obesity, and I included that in the panel of genes that I tested for my PhD. And at that time, we didn't really know what was the function of FTO. So in my thesis, I still wrote, it's probably this protein, and it's probably doing this and this and this. So it wasn't known. But now it's been identified as the first RNA demethylase. And so that is the name. And the function mainly is then to repair DNA and RNA by oxidative demethylation. And it is expressed in all cells with a high expression there, which is a lot involved in energy metabolism. So this gene, when you look at the SNPs and the association with diet and so on, also need to look at things like what is inhibiting the gene, what is increasing the transcription of the gene. So just in that figure, for instance, those vitamin B12, those ones, that will increase the methylation of FTO and consequently block adipogenesis. And these ones, triglycerols and smoking and milk, for instance, will decrease the transcription translation or the expression. And it will then have an effect also on adipogenesis through that. So different effects that the diet can have in that way. So this is just a summary of the studies that showed, in association studies that showed associations with the FTO gene. So in this list, here you can see the different polymorphisms. So BMI, with satiety, overeating, fat consumption, carbohydrate consumption, protein consumption, vitamin B12, lipids, birth mass, and so on. So many associations has been found with regards to that. I'm just going to skip that. It's also just explaining the adipogenesis. And then in meta-analysis of, if we look at intervention studies, obviously we don't only want association studies for these genes. If we want to recommend it as a therapeutic sort of dietary treatment and someone was changed, you want to investigate it in intervention studies. And that is quite difficult to do as well. But the second bullet, just in very large studies, so far those with the FTO risk variant responded equally well to weight loss interventions targeting diet, physical activity, compared to those not carrying the risk variant. So now if we have to consider all the, that's just another one, all these direct to consumer testing, obviously I showed you now one gene. One must then consider all of those genes sort of separately, but they are done as well, or they tested in a panel. So, and they interact with each other. So one must also actually do studies on that panel of 20 genes or 50 genes and how they interact and with the environment to make conclusions. And there's no studies like that, that did exactly these panels that the companies are using. So we can't really answer that question yet. So if we conclude from these GTG sort of tests, so the research is interesting, but it's complex, and the variants are associated. So the variants that they include in the test are definitely associated in some way with a disease or a risk factor or something like that. And you will often find that people will tell you, if they go for these tests, this is exactly how I am. So the test will tell them you shouldn't eat a lot of fatty foods, or something is, yes, but I don't like it. So they will sort of relate to the test often, or the effect of alcohol on the person, and if the test is now about alcohol metabolism. So it's often based then on this candidate gene approach and association studies, very little intervention studies. And if there are, it's often based on one gene. So it's an intervention study, but they included only one gene or a couple, like 10 genes or so to investigate. And then, yeah, so I said sort of that. So we must just remember that the polygenic nature of the diseases that we look at. And for instance, that one that I showed, there's not only 4 SNPs that's involved in fat metabolism, so we can't just study that. And then another fact is that the SNPs all contribute a very small effect on increasing the risk to develop a disease. So it's like 1%, or even less than 1%. And it's often much smaller than the conventional risk factors, the things that we already have in place. So things like high blood pressure or high cholesterol levels or things like that, or smoking and so on. And there are many confounding factors that we need to take into account when looking at these associations. So then the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is in the USA. So they do these position statements on therapeutic treatment of diseases, medical nutrition therapy for diseases. And they did one in 2014. And that position statement on nutrigenetics, nutrigenomics, indicated that there's not enough evidence. It was sort of clear, there's not enough evidence, shouldn't be recommended. Obviously, the research was very new at that stage, not a lot of intervention studies and so on. And then in 2021, they revisited this and sort of updated their position statement, and then they concluded that they can't actually make a position statement because of the complexity of this research, and there's not really, the genes are definitely involved in the development of the diseases, but we can't make recommendations yet. So what they then said, sort of thinking of, is it now harmful for the person to go for a genetic test? What harm will it do to that person? Maybe it will motivate them to change their diet if they get the results. So let's test that question in terms of, if you do go for a genetic test, will there be an effect on, for instance, these? So they don't worry about the type of SNPs in the test, or the validity of the SNPs, or whether it's now proven evidence-based that you must follow these SNPs and then, or you must do these SNPs and follow this type of diet. So they don't answer that question, just to see the effect of going for the genetic test. So it was then a systematic review. This was what was included. And it had to look at health outcomes. Those were the crosses. No studies investigated those health outcomes. So some did look at prevention of disease progression, and then they had to include one of these outcomes, like either an anthropometry, body composition, lipid profile, and so on. And basically the conclusions, you can see there's like fair quality evidence or weak evidence or so on. So there was no significant differences in lipid profile. So this was now people randomized control studies with the one group followed in a genetic diet based on genetic results, and the other group followed a general diet based on maybe conventional risk factors, or there was different categories of what they could do. But then no significant differences on weight or fasting, blood glucose, or and so on. There was one study with one difference in body fat, but it was only one, so it's weak evidence. And so the general conclusion was that there's not enough research, there's not enough evidence to say that if you do these genetic tests that you will that will help you to improve your health outcomes. And then there was another one like that, where the question was, does genetic testing improve dietary intake? So if they get the results from the genetic test, will they change their diet? So that was a Cochrane review and just what was included. And these are just the outcomes of some of the studies. So you can see some found, for instance, reduced alcohol intake. They tested now the alcohol gene, increased intake of fish and fruit, for instance. The green ones had no effect. That one is improved fat quality. This one reduced sodium intake. So this is now in the genetic group. Reduced dietary fat intake. So it had some of the studies had positive results. So the people at 6 months, they did change their dietary intake based on the SNPs or the variants in their genes. And then there's another green one, so no effect on that. And then you can see there's a greater improvement in dietary patterns and greater improvement in the Mediterranean diet. This is just a summary of the number of SNPs. So you can see that varies as well. There's like 5 SNPs tested in that study. There was just 1. There was 5 SNPs, 6 SNPs. So not many genes and SNPs tested in these studies. So just like overall observations that we do when we evaluate these studies. Also, if you look at the duration of the studies, this was 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, 12 months. So also very short durations, no long-term studies, which is not good. And then lastly, another systematic review. And on the same question, this was just another independent group. It was not from that Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And they also, just the final plot with the observations that there was no difference between those with a genotype diet and those on another type of diet in the studies that they investigated. And they also looked at the general population and then also at-risk groups. So at-risk group would be, for instance, those with type 2 diabetes or with heart disease, and they went for these testing. So if we conclude from that, does genetic testing improve dietary intake? We can really see that there's some studies that indicate yes, that positive, but if you really look deeper into the studies and the design of the studies and the number of studies, it's not a convincing effect. So it seems like it could be beneficial, but personalization of nutrition advice doesn't only mean genetics. It's also, if I ask you, what did you eat yesterday? And I see you ate a lot of processed meats, for instance, and I give you a recommendation based on this, rather try and include this, and this. It's also a personalized message. So that's based on previous diet. So usually personalization of nutrition advice is beneficial. So the genotype-based advice may motivate an individual to change their diet beyond levels of personalization. Some studies report no change in behavior, and the genotype-based results does not cause negative changes in dietary behavior. That was also one of the things that are the side effects of going for a genetic test, except now for the amount that you have to pay for the test. Are there any other side effects of that? But it was not really investigated at that point. It brings about ethical questions as well, which we'll go through just now. And then just some general observations. The research is relatively new, so like the last 10 years or so, 10, 15 years. And then also the heterogeneity of the studies. We must consider that before we can conclude on these findings. So especially the interventions with the diets, they are all different. All the interventions, they tested different SNPs, they tested different diets, and so on. Also the intensity of the diets, like how many times the person go to a health professional, like weekly for the 6 months. So then you would expect a better outcome compared to a person who just go every 6 months to a health professional, for instance, or to someone for advice. The populations also differ in terms of age, disease risk, disease conditions, ancestry, and so on. The delivery of the genotype advice was also different, and the perception that they had of the advice. And then also the different methods that was used to measure the effect of diet in these studies, and then the SNPs included, like we said. And also, obviously, the statistical methods used in the studies are so different. So from that, the recommendations is then diet recommendations should not be solely based on genetic results, but we must all still be knowledgeable about nutritional genomics, and training regarding this is important, and especially if you have clients and so on, also are people asking you about this, and more research is definitely needed. So even if it's just an association study with one gene to try it is important. So all contributes to the body of evidence. We also need more intervention studies. And then just lastly, I'd want to just go into sort of the future of personalized nutrition. So we know it's not only the nutrigenetics or nutrigenomics, but there are many other omics involved, and where nutrients and diet and foods are all involved. So they are just some examples. And if you really look at personalized nutrition, then one considers sort of your performance metrics, circadian rhythms, diet, physical activity, smoking, stress, and so forth. You consider the person's age, gender, disease status. Certain medications can influence dietary recommendations. You also need to consider dietary preferences, social factors, religion, food availability, economic status of the person. And then you can look at all these biological factors. So we have the genetics, the gut microbiome, the other omics. You have your general clinical and biochemical tests, so clinical examination for instance, nutrient deficiencies or for risk factors, or biochemical tests like cholesterol and those type of things. And then your anthropometry. So it's a lot of different factors that needs to be considered. So they all need to be considered to make a personalized recommendation. It's not only genetics. And what is hypothesized as the future, and the NIH in the US has actually made this one of the focus areas in the next 10 years. And they've allocated a lot of money to grants investigating this, is to incorporate all those things that I've just said. That's basically a summary here of all those things. And it should be measured in people like on an ongoing basis, like with wearables. And we already have some of those things in place, like to measure physical activity or those type of things. So smartphones, diagnostic tests, and so on. And then now we can actually see that this can happen in the future with AI. So with artificial intelligence and big data and so on, all these factors will then be put together in algorithms and so on. And then you will get qualitative and quantitative, sort of just-in-time, evidence-based advice on how to personalize someone's nutrition, what they must eat, their dietary advice. So that's sort of the future that they proposed for this. And then just to indicate where nutrigenetics fits into this whole future thing. So they indicated in the past, we have, I'm just going to read here, sorry. There was like a single focus on nutritional genomics. So that's what we sort of spoke about today, these days. They could be under the monogenic test, like inborn errors of metabolism, but it's also early personalized nutrition recommendations based on SNPs, gene nutrient interactions, SNPs and variants and so on. So that is sort of the past. In the present, there's an increasing multi-omics focus and integration. So how can you integrate nutrigenetics and the microbiome and all of those, and then integrate that with AI and systems biology to make then a diagnosis and a recommendation. And then the futures, what I sort of explains, the next generation wearables and incorporating everything like physical activity and all of those things in making recommendations. And I'm sure if we look at how a cell phone looked like 15 years ago and how it looks like today, I'm sure this will happen in the next 10 or 15 years. So just lastly, some ethical considerations. So should we recommend these tests or not? So that is sort of an ethical considerations for health professionals and for trainer and so on, health coach. So just to bear in mind that about how much genetic information should be disclosed. So some genes are pleiotropic, so they often, how do you call that? There's the different diseases linked to a SNP of the gene, and some may be positive for the patient, but some may be negative, but it's the same SNP. So how do you explain that to the person? So where genetic counselors comes is very necessary for that. Yeah, we look at the science of the evidence and the clinical validity and utility of the evidence. But I just want to focus on this one, a false sense of security of future health. That is sort of a negative point, because now if you test a panel of genes and the person has very healthy genes, if you can say that like that, for maybe for obesity or for a disease like type 2 diabetes, they may think, okay, my genes is okay, so I can just eat what I want, or I can just not do physical activity or so on. So that is a risk factor. And on the other side, where did I put that? Of hand quality. Sorry, I can't now find that one. Anyway, the other side is now if you have a lot of bad genes, if I can call it like that, or SNPs in your genes that it may cause a lot of anxiety or and so on about your future disease status. So the effect on the individual. So then lastly, I think for in terms of research, so like I said previously, the research must continue. We need to do much more research on all the different components of nutrigenetics. There's a question about the gold standard sort of approach of randomized control trials, especially now when you do a therapy recommendations for diet, because that is probably not the best approach in genetics because there's so many different cross what you call it, linkages between the genes and the environmental factors. So it's recommended to use other type of study designs like indicated here. And then if someone comes to you or if someone wants to do a test or already did a test, we should then advise them. We should know about these genes probably and assist to them to interpret that. And then also the genetic info may motivate some individuals, for others it may not. Yeah, that could be a beneficial effect. Sorry. Yep, that's it. Thank you.